It is the middle of the 13th century. The Church of Rome has helped deliver Western Europe from the barbarians, and Christianity is experiencing unparalleled growth. With these achievements comes a dark side, for the Church has also launched the Inquisition. It is an era when church and state frequently overlap. The clergy believes it is their duty to protect the people from error. Barely 50 years after the Inquisition begins, Spanish King Peter of Aragon proclaims,
"The enemies of the cross of Christ and violators of the Christian law are likewise our enemies and the enemies of our kingdom, and ought therefore to be dealt with as such."
The Inquisition casts its shadow across much of Europe. With the silent acknowledgement of Europe's rulers, the terrible excesses of these so-called courts of faith grow unchecked. On the Spanish Peninsula, where some of the worst of the Inquisition takes place, a campaign is conducted to drive Muslims out of the country. By the middle of the 15th century, nothing is left of the area's Islamic communities except Granada. In 1469, Granada's fate is sealed by the marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. Their powerful union combines Aragon and Castile to form what is now known as Spain. Ferdinand and Isabella's armies conquer Granada in the spring of 1492, just months before Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World. For the first time in over 700 years, there is no Islamic rule anywhere in Western Europe.
There were some periods where Spain was the most tolerant country anywhere in Western Europe, and probably anywhere in the Mediterranean, where Christians and Muslims and Jews lived together, people intermarried. There was no sense that somehow, if you are a Muslim or if you're a Christian, you have to be out.
But Ferdinand and Isabella want a unified Spain, not just in government, but a Spain unified in Christianity. To achieve this, they bend a tool of the church to their own ends. This is the Spanish Inquisition.
It's a way to unify Spain and make it a centralized state. Hitherto, Iberia had been split up into different kingdoms. Now it was to be one kingdom, and it had to have a common ideology. And that meant that you couldn't tolerate deviance in the same way as before.
In 1492, the Jews are required to convert or leave Spain. On the very same day that Columbus first heads east across the Atlantic, thousands of Jews also sail off, leaving forever the country that had been their homeland for generations. Those who remain and convert become the most likely candidates for the inquisitors. Within a decade, Muslims are also forced to make the same difficult choice of conversion or deportation. By the early 16th century, through state terror and at a cost of a great many lives, Ferdinand and Isabella unite Spain under a single church, the Catholic Church. The Inquisition might well have exhausted itself at this point, but a new threat to the Church of Rome is about to arise. A group of people who call themselves reformers will soon produce the most monumental revolution Christianity has ever seen. And just as this great theological revolution in Christianity is about to unfold, a revolution in technology occurs in Germany. These two events will become interwoven into history. It is the middle of the 15th century in a town called Mainz. Johann Gutenberg creates the modern printing press with his invention of movable metal alphabetic characters. Among the first books to be printed is the Bible. The good book is about to become directly accessible to the people. Some 75 years later in Britain, a man named William Tyndale translates the New Testament into lively, simple, and thoroughly readable English. It is printed in 1526.
People can now read for themselves, and it's not a very big step from the idea that you can read for yourself to the idea that you have to interpret what you've read, and now you can think for yourself.
This is not seen as a welcome development in all quarters. Up until now, the Bible has only existed in Latin, the domain of educated clergy. Translating the Bible into native languages is viewed as heresy and a direct threat to the church. For this, Tyndale is strangled and burned at the stake. The translations of Tyndale and others bring to an end the autocracy of knowledge which the clergy holds over the people. Back in Germany, another man is also translating the Bible, this time into German. But this man will be known for far more than his translations. His name is Martin Luther. It is the eve of All Saints' Day, October 31st, 1517, the small town of Wittenberg. Luther, a common friar, approaches the door of the town's church. He is outraged by the excesses of the Catholic clergy. The Archbishop of Mainz has just sponsored a sale of church indulgences to help pay for the construction of St. Peter's in Rome. It is salvation at a price. Salvation for those who can afford to buy it.
An indulgence technically means the substitution of one penance for another. But by Luther's time, it had become corrupted because the church simply said you can make a financial contribution and that will suffice in place of certain penances.
Luther is about to deal the symbolic blow that will begin the Reformation. He nails his protest, a list of 95 theses, to the door of Wittenberg's church. This small act will give rise to a radical new sect of Christians who will derive their very name from this protest: Protestants. Luther will be reviled for tearing apart the one church and thereby threatening the very essence of Western civilization.
How do you hold together something as diverse as Europe? You held it together by a common Christianity. That's the reason why any break in that common Christianity is greeted so ferociously, because it's not merely a disruption of faith and not merely a disruption of society. It's a kind of undercutting of civilization.
The more Luther scrutinizes church practice, the more he finds fault. Beginning in 1517, Luther publishes a series of works that are increasingly sharp attacks upon the church. He finally comes to call the Pope an Antichrist.
This would be the same thing as someone coming to you today and saying, I think the presidency of the United States is an abomination. I think we should abolish the Supreme Court, get rid of Congress, and we should have a dictator or something like this. I mean, you're going completely upsetting the established order of things. This is shocking. It's unthinkable.
In response to Luther's shocking criticisms, Pope Leo X issues an edict condemning dozens of Luther's works and giving him 60 days to recant. The response is characteristically Luther.
The papal bull is the sum of all impiety, blasphemy, ignorance, impudence, hypocrisy, lying. In a word, It is Satan and his Antichrist.
Not surprisingly, Luther is excommunicated. But by German law, he must have a trial. The church looks to Charles V to oversee Luther's hearing, which is to take place in the German city of Worms. Charles, a young king of Spanish origin, has just been elected Holy Roman Emperor. Luther's followers have become so numerous that they are seen not just as a threat to the church, but a threat to civil stability. At the hearing, the emperor asks Luther to recant. To this, Luther delivers his now famous response.
Unless I am convinced by Scripture, I neither can nor will recant anything, since it is neither right nor safe to act against conscience. God help me.
Luther is declared an outlaw.
So Luther leaves the Diet of Worms an excommunicated, an outlaw in violation of the law of the empire, and who may be in fact arrested or killed without any legal rights whatever. It's the most dangerous moment in Luther's life.
Luther is promptly kidnapped by a friend who spirits him to Wartburg Castle, where he remains hidden for the better part of a year. But the Reformation has irrevocably begun.
I think the Reformation is absolutely an idea whose time has come. It's a 16th century way of being Christian. It was beginning that process of building a modern society, as a kind of civilization that was absolutely unprecedented in world history, with an entirely different economic base, and that would give the West complete power and ultimately world hegemony. This was beginning in the 16th century, and once you've got major changes in society, you cannot be religious in the same way again.
One of Luther's chief ideas, central to the Reformation, is that salvation can come solely through belief in Jesus. Luther rejects the age-old church position that salvation comes through good works and penance. Instead, Luther says that Christians are saved by faith and Scripture alone. This is a revolutionary break with the Roman Church. In an age when common people were largely powerless, salvation through faith and Scripture alone marks the rise of one of the most powerful ideas in the West, the individual.
I don't think Luther cares one bit about fitting into the cosmos. Luther is about, what about me? And how can he resolve this problem? He says, if I believe, I am saved.
But a troubling question now surfaces with Luther's new idea. If salvation comes through belief in faith alone, what motivation is there for morality? Was moral chaos about to be unleashed? By the year 1530, Martin Luther's movement of Protestant reform is sweeping across Western Europe. It may be the right idea at the right time. The church is seen by many as an often corrupt power, appearing insensitive to the needs of the average Christian. Almost overnight, hundreds of thousands break with the Church of Rome to follow Luther. All over Europe, reform is in the air.
The fact that it breaks out at Cambridge and Oxford, it breaks out in today's Scandinavia, it's in northern France, all over northern Europe and into Central and Eastern Europe, suggests that the seeds were there all along, the seething was there, the urgency for change, the political openings were there.
Many adopt Luther's ideas. Others dramatically refine them. Perhaps the most influential of all is a mild-mannered clergyman named John Calvin. Born in northern France, he moves to Geneva, a city in the throes of its own transformation. The allies of Rome living in Geneva have been driven out, and the city has broken with the Catholic Church. But Geneva is morally and organizationally adrift. John Calvin, a man of discipline, assumes the task of imposing order.
Compared to Luther, Calvin seems to be kind of colorless. He's a diminutive man with a great many health problems.
Calvin sees an ideal society, a city of God, a holy commonwealth. In place of the Church of Rome, Calvin creates a local government that is both civil and religious. Its citizens are expected to live a deeply pious life. Gambling, drinking, and dancing are all sharply restricted. Geneva soon becomes a model of Protestant reform, productive and devout, with a new breed of citizen, people who claim the middle ground between nobleman and peasant.
Part of what Protestantism is about and why it becomes popular is that there is this new opening for what might be called a middle class, that unprecedented numbers of people are now going to be able to move into a quasi-capitalist society and move out of becoming peasants. And that is one of the fueling engines of Protestantism and modernism more generally.
But in the pursuit of a devout society, Calvin's Geneva also develops a shadow side, austere, harsh, and highly controlled. Spying on friends and neighbors is just one means of preserving moral and religious order. There is another matter of increasing concern to John Calvin, which he addresses in his primary work called The Institutes. If, as Martin Luther would have it, a Christian can be saved by faith alone, what motive is there to do good works?
If this world and investing in it makes no sense, then you're going to have a very hard time justifying to yourself or to anybody else why you should do this and not that.
Calvin's solution is ingenious. He reasons that only some are saved, while others are damned. The problem is, no one knows who is saved, except God. Hidden deeper here are age-old questions. Are our lives predetermined and known in advance by God? And if so, how can we exercise our free will?
It seems that this would lead to a sense of fatalism, and you would just throw up your hands and say, well, it's already decided, so what can I do? It had actually the opposite effect. Calvinists, wherever they were active, were extremely energetic, extremely busy in changing the world, in making names for themselves in their society. And it's connected to this sense of being part of God's plan. If you were saved, then you would be successful and effective in being an instrument and vehicle of God. If you were a complete loser and immoral, it would be unlikely.
And this is why I think of Calvin as the guy who sort of saved it all. Because Calvin says, you have a vocation in the world. You have to do a certain thing in the world. And it's by working that vocation out that you work out your salvation. And now the world is reinvested again as a place where it's a cosmos.
As Christian doctrine continues to evolve in the West, a pivotal moment is about to unfold for the faith in the East. Constantinople, the epicenter of Eastern Christianity, is about to experience something new, a foreign invasion. Is it destiny or the unfolding deeds of a willful humanity? As the Protestant Reformation begins to erode Catholic Church power in the West, the Eastern Church also declines, taking a dramatic turn for the worse. For centuries, the Eastern Empire has been shrinking in the face of Islamic advance. By the 1400s, little else remains but the ruins of Constantinople in the wake of Western Europe's Fourth Crusade. In 1453, Turkish Sultan Mehmed II assaults and captures Constantinople. Even though Islamic rule under the Sultan is tolerant, the Christians are a subjugated people.
Many of the common saints and personalities of Christianity and Judaism are named in the Quran and are much appreciated. They were not required, as were pagans, to forcibly convert to Islam. Nevertheless, they were very clearly second-class citizens.
Christians living under Turkish rule pay heavy taxes. They are encouraged to convert to Islam, while being strictly prohibited from preaching their faith to the Muslims. Churches are confiscated and often converted to mosques. Constantinople, the second Rome, capital of the Eastern Church, now ceases to be the heart of one of the greatest Christian traditions. No sooner does this light appear to be extinguished than it flames anew 1,000 miles away. Now it is Moscow that rises as the new center of Eastern Christianity. Quickly developing into a powerful force, Moscow claims the title of the third and final Rome.
The Church of Moscow shines more brightly throughout the world than the sun. 2 Romes have fallen, but a third stands and a fourth never can be. The monk Philotheus.
The rise of the Russian Church is not the only result of the Muslim conquest of Christian Constantinople. A great stream of refugees now migrates westward from Constantinople, and many settle in Italy. In this human river are artists, intellectuals, and scholars who will contribute to one of the greatest periods in civilized history, the Renaissance. Art, architecture. The glories of the Renaissance are majesty itself. Swept up in the spirit of this Renaissance, this new beginning, Pope Julius II becomes one of its driving forces, commissioning some of the greatest works of art ever created. It is now that Raphael paints his Vatican frescoes. And Michelangelo begins work on the Sistine Chapel. Though brilliant, Michelangelo is a gloomy, irritable man who bitterly resents being rushed, even by a pope. Their exchanges become so heated that at one point the pontiff threatens to hurl the artist from his scaffold. Michelangelo takes 4 years to complete the ceiling, but in the end, it is immediately recognized as one of the most magnificent works of art on earth. The Renaissance also sees great achievements in science, philosophy, and religion. The fuel behind these achievements is a treasure of ancient knowledge, much of which had been lost in the darkness of Europe at the end of the first millennium. But in Spain, this ancient knowledge, consisting largely of classic Greek writings, had been preserved by Muslim scholars.
Mathematics, astronomy, botany, history, philosophy, and jurisprudence were to be mastered in Spain and Spain alone. Whatever makes a kingdom great and prosperous, whatever tends to refinement and civilization, was found in Muslim Spain. Stanley Lane Poole, The Moors in Spain.
In one of history's greatest ironies, the very people who had preserved these works as a flame in the surrounding darkness had been expelled from Spain in the years before and after 1492. They are the Moors, Spanish Muslims. Now this great storehouse of ancient knowledge is rediscovered by European monks who journey to the heart of Muslim learning in Spain. And thus, in addition to the human stream flowing westward into Italy from the fallen Constantinople, the Renaissance is fed by a great tributary of classic human knowledge flowing eastward to Italy from Spain.
Spain became the conduit of much of Islamic civilization. Christians came from as far away as Scotland, France, and Italy to study Arabic, philosophy, and theology.
The works of one ancient Greek in particular survive through Muslim scholars. His name is Aristotle, and his philosophy will have profound implications for the newly emerging discipline of science. Aristotelian logic provides the basis for Europeans to shift their focus from inward contemplation to outward observation of the world around them. It results in a sudden burst of natural science.
There was a great change. And I suppose that you could even say that Western technology is ultimately grounded on the work of those scholars who went from France to Spain to bring back a result.
With the rediscovery of classic Greek works in Spain, and particularly a re-examination of the writings of Galen and Hippocrates, come great advances in medicine. Scientists such as Da Vinci and Vesalius make systematic dissections of human bodies, long forbidden in many quarters, particularly religious quarters, marking the beginning of surgery as a real science. Paracelsus, often called the Luther of medicine, is the first to bring together chemistry and biology, a crucial leap forward in the development of modern medicine. In the name of preserving Christian values, both church and state often work together to suppress scientific advances. But even more often, church and state are engaged in a struggle throughout Europe. A struggle for property, a struggle for power, a struggle for souls. This ongoing drama indelibly marks Christianity's second millennium. Increasingly, rulers of emerging nations ally themselves with the new Protestant reformers. Against the power of Rome. Nowhere is this truer than in England.
Of course, England is the obvious example of the importance of nationalism in this whole process, where Protestantism comes about so that Henry VIII can divorce his wife.
This particular struggle between church and state comes from one of the Pope's staunchest allies, King Henry VIII. Henry is a devout Catholic. The Pope has even given him the title Defender of the Faith. Yet now in 1533, he urgently needs a papal dispensation. It stems from his obsession for a male heir to his throne, something he has been unable to produce with his current wife, Catherine of Aragon. He takes a mistress in Anne Boleyn, and soon she is pregnant. He secretly marries her, but for the coming baby to be truly legitimate, he must get a divorce from his first wife against the laws of the Catholic Church. Henry now appeals to the Pope, but in doing so, Henry VIII triggers a sequence of events that will end in the birth of a saint and the death of a friend. It is the early 16th century in London. King Henry VIII has just been informed that Pope Clement VII has denied his request for a divorce. In response, Henry deposes the Pope's Archbishop of Canterbury and appoints his own. The new Archbishop promptly declares the first marriage null and recognizes Henry's secret marriage to Anne Boleyn. Back and forth goes this struggle between church and state, as Pope Clement now excommunicates Henry. In response, Henry VIII breaks completely with Rome and places all the churches in his kingdom under his own rule. This marks the beginning of the Anglicans and the Church of England. In 1534, Henry goes one step further, requiring all his subjects to swear an oath to the Supremacy Act. The act states that Henry is the supreme ruler of England, placing him above church authorities.
Be it enacted that the king shall be taken, accepted, and reputed the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England. The Supremacy Act, 1534.
There is one other consequence of Henry's struggle with the church. Thomas More is Lord Chancellor and a humanist who finds himself the recipient of the king's attention. But he has no illusions about Henry VIII.
If my head would win him a castle in France, it should not fail to go. William Roper, The Life of Sir Thomas More.
Indeed, Thomas More has not only declined to attend Henry's wedding to Anne Boleyn, he has refused Henry's act of succession, which would make Henry and Anne's offspring successors to the throne. Henry has thrown him in the Tower of London, and on July 6, 1535, Thomas More is beheaded, dying for his principles. After all this, Anne Boleyn fails to give Henry a son. She herself is beheaded 11 months later. And thus, friendship is lost, honor betrayed, the Church of England born, and precisely 400 years later, Thomas More is beatified and declared a saint by Pope Pius XI. No longer would the Pope be Europe's supreme authority, and never again would the Catholic Church have such complete dominance over Western Europe. By the middle of the 16th century, Lutheran, Calvinist, and Anglican sects are becoming the faith of much of Western Europe. It seems that within another 50 years, Protestants may completely replace Catholics. But their meteoric rise is about to be halted. The fuse of reform that is to revitalize the Catholic Church is lit in the year 1521 with the single blast of a cannon. nestled in the Spanish Pyrenees, just 25 miles south of the French border, is the picturesque city of Pamplona. A seemingly ordinary battle rages over territory. It appears to have no bearing on the evolution of Christianity. As the battle unfolds, a cannonball shatters the leg of a soldier. Shattered, too, are his dreams of grandeur and conquest. His name is Ignatius Loyola. During a long and painful convalescence, the only readings which give Loyola relief are spiritual works. They inspire the restless warrior to become a soldier once again, but this time in the service of the Virgin Mary.
He decided since he couldn't serve His Lady the Queen, he will serve His Lady the Queen of Heaven. And so at a very late age, he began studying theology, and he gathered around himself a group of people who were equally devout.
Already in his 30s, Loyola takes the same passion he once had for fighting and now redirects it to religious study. His goal is to live his life in the land of Jesus. In 1522, Loyola sets off for the Holy Land and pauses in Barcelona. There, legend has it, that Loyola kneels all night before the altar of the shrine of Our Lady of Montserrat. This is the custom he knows as a soldier. But Loyola now leaves his sword and knife at the shrine, gives away all his clothes, and dresses himself in the garments of poverty. Over the next 10 years, Loyola devotes himself to meditation and writes Spiritual Exercises, a book designed to help people discover their personal role in God's world. Loyola's emphasis on the individual seems in line with the thinking of the Protestant Reformation. But Loyola is strictly Catholic.
If you think of Calvin and Loyola as these two people who take Luther's basic turn to the individual, but they sort of help it out by saying, yes, you are an individual, but you still have to play a role in this big cosmos and society. Then you see this radically, what I think of as a radical reinvention of Christianity.
After 2 years in Barcelona, Loyola moves on to Alcalá and its university. In Alcalá, he studies and practices his first love, which is teaching, especially children. But it is his preaching that gets him into trouble. The Inquisition looks upon anyone preaching who is not ordained as suspect. Loyola is thrown into jail for 42 days. And when he is released, he is forbidden to preach. Undeterred, Loyola moves to Paris to study for the priesthood. Legend has it that Loyola goes to school to learn Latin, and that he sits in grammar school, the only adult among adolescent children. In 1540, Ignatius Loyola founds a new order known as the Jesuits. He recruits the best, brightest, and most highly dedicated to join his ranks. Their missionary zeal makes them one of the most potent forces in the history of Christianity. Their mission is to revive the Catholic Church in this time of Reformation. They are asked to start a school in a small Sicilian town, and within decades, Jesuit schools are in demand all over Europe. Jesuits are soon highly influential wherever they go. As the 16th century draws to a close, not only is the advance of the Protestants stopped, But a significant portion of Europe reformed by the Protestants is won back to the Catholic Church, due largely to the efforts of the Jesuits.
There were people who thought, well, the Protestants have gone too far. They've thrown away the baby with the bath. One finds a period of great enthusiasm, followed by a period of second thoughts, followed even by a period of retrenchment.
Not all are converted by the word, however. Many are forced to convert by the sword. Wars erupt all over Europe between Protestant and Catholic over which faith shall prevail.
The dominant notion is that the unity and peace and tranquility of society depends on a common faith. That's the glue that holds society together. And therefore, when somebody is attacking and undermining the stability of society, that is certainly going to provoke, if all other solutions fail, certainly going to provoke attempts at violent solution.
It is a time when civilization is based on one ruler, one faith. A time when the notion of many faiths under the same rule is still centuries away.
It's a sorry thing to say, but I'm afraid if you want to know what the human race really thinks, what they really believe in, you have to ask what they're willing to kill for. And in this case, they were willing to kill for the unity of Christendom. I mean, it just sounds awful when I say it. It is awful when I say it.
For more than 100 years, Europe convulses in wars of religion, as Christian slaughters Christian in the name of God.
But the wars of religion are civil wars. So you have to imagine doing this to your own country. They were basically self-inflicted devastation.
The wars end for little else than pure exhaustion. By 1650, a war-torn, weary Europe remains divided by faith. But Christianity's physical and spiritual exhaustion is countered by the growing influence of Loyola and his Jesuit missionaries. The Church of Rome is about to make one of the most profound changes in the last half of its second millennium. Christianity is going to travel beyond Europe and to the rest of the world.
Tu spec perennis omnium, intende quas fundam preces, tui per opem famus.